Good afternoon, X Winterview back with another brief dialogue for his dear friend Annastacey. X Winterview is a bit tired. Wonder what that's all about. This brief dialogue is on who gets enlightened. Who does that happen to? It's a very strange question. The question's all muddled, in fact. The other brief dialogues have mentioned the self existing as concept. It's imagined, or it exists only conceptually, as an object in thought, you could say, which isn't really any existence at all, except as an idea, which you could say has its own level of existence and reality in a sense. But it does point to the artificiality and arbitrariness of that imagined character. And yet, there seems to be a person. It seems to be very real. The experience, the personal experience, seems completely valid and normal, and very hard for the mind to grasp that this is in some way a fiction. How could it be? I feel like I'm a person. And when it comes to enlightenment and liberation, it feels that it's going to happen to me, that I will be enlightened, that I will become liberated. Perhaps even I'll become liberated from myself somehow. I now know about this concept of myself as a concept. So what I think will happen is that I will realize that I'm just a concept. And when I realize that, then there'll be liberation or enlightenment. That seems like a good idea. Logical. But it kind of misses the point as well. The misperception, you might say, the misunderstanding, has to do with who and what I am. Not I, the person, because we know that's a fiction, but that basic subjectivity itself. Who or what is this consciousness? Who or what is this awakeness? It's not a person. It's not anything. It has no objective qualities. This awakeness itself just is. There's just an isness about the awakeness. And the person that I think I am, or believe myself to be, appears in this awakeness. Appears in it. And it is not the awakeness itself. The awakeness itself can't be described. It can't be pointed to. At least not easily. It has nothing to point to. It's the substrate of existence itself. This awakeness is already awake. Nothing was done to trigger the awakeness. It wasn't born into the world and then you woke up. The world was born into that awakeness, which makes it mysterious. It's eternal, this awakeness. Everything within the range of time and space appears in this awakeness. So our thinking around it is easily muddled when we add a person who we believe to be awake. If it's a person who is awake, then when the person dies, then there'll be no awakeness. When the person was born, that's when awakeness started. So if there is no self, if it's only a concept, then who or what on earth gets enlightened? The question itself now doesn't really make sense. How can a concept get anything? How can a concept do anything? The popular ideas around enlightenment seem to still be anthropomorphized in the body, that when the body somehow gets the required energy resources or unlocks some kind of energy in the body, then the person will become enlightened, or might become enlightened. It's still imagined that there's a person in there somewhere who this will happen to, that this person will become enlightened at a certain point in the future. How can something that is time-bound, and conceptual for that matter, suddenly awake to the infinite and boundless? It seems like we've got our thinking back to front. It seems like when time and space go away, let's say, then whatever's left is obvious. It's the obviousness, too, that in some ways veils or hides the obvious. The experience of enlightenment is an idea that it will happen for a person, that the person will suddenly wake up. There'll be a before and an after. A person, that is the concept of a person, can seem to have realizations of truth, of reality, of deeper truths and realities and deeper meanings of the world and the universe. This can seem to happen to a person. Even if we remove the person from the mix and just call it realization, that there is a realization or there is an awakening, this again somehow seems to imply an experience that will happen at some point in the future. What cannot be seen by the mind, maybe because the mind's the wrong tool, but what can't be seen by the mind is that awakeness is ever present. It's already the underpinning, the substrate, whatever you want to call it, of existence itself. Therefore, that which occurs or appears within it will not have an effect on it. A person who seemingly appears in it will not somehow turn around to that awakeness and realize it. Oh, that's the awakeness. Now I get it. The whole way the mind thinks about it is back to front. That's not anyone's fault, by the way. That's just a natural function of the way the mind operates, time and space bound, logical and linear, and so forth. We hear stories sometimes that when the idea of a person stops, then there'll be enlightenment. This is another good idea. It seems to make sense. So there's a waiting for that person to stop, to go away. But who's that? Who's waiting is the question. What happens is, very sneakily, another person is created behind the scenes who is waiting for the person to drop. It can't be escaped, and it's so clever and so sneaky in a way. We might hear another concept that when certain energy chakras or systems in the body, this is a more sort of mystical model, reach a certain level, then the person will fall away. Again, it creates another person in the background waiting for this to fall away. Whenever the mind is engaged in this thinking, it straight away creates a person straight off the bat, because the mind needs a subject for the object, or to the subject who is the witness to the object. It has to create it. The mind cannot comprehend a sort of disembodied universe in a way, a sort of just an appearance in space. It has to, by virtue of it being the mind, put a person in the mix. And then it all makes sense. I'm aware. I'm aware of the trees. I'm aware of the road. I'm aware of driving. I'm aware of my thinking, and so on. Liberation or enlightenment is indescribable in that it doesn't happen to anyone. It doesn't happen to a person. It is acausal. And it's just it's just one of those really annoying, I guess, facts of the matter. Is something that is out of time and out of space is acausal and a priori and ever present. It's just, it can't be thought about. That's I guess the bottom line. It cannot be thought about. Which is interesting because it's highly thought about. It's something that the mind loves to wonder about. The mind comes up with all manner of thinking around enlightenment and liberation. It conceptualizes it, even when it becomes very sophisticated in its thinking about enlightenment. It still can't help but create a person lurking quietly in the background to whom this will happen. So we might sit here and talk about this and because we're all very clever, become very sophisticated in our thinking, we go, okay, the person's a concept, got it. Then we hear what it is. It's a kind of contraction in the body, a somatic tension of sorts that gives the impression of there being a person. Great, got it. It's a somatic tension, it's a conceptualizing. Right. So the mind naturally goes, so when that stops, then I'll be enlightened, kind of thing. And that's the last joke. It just can't quite get there. And you say, no, you won't get enlightened. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. So even that's now taken on by the mind. Okay, I get it. I can't get enlightened. Right, got it. So I won't get enlightened. When will I be enlightened? Or even that, maybe go one step further. Okay, I won't be enlightened. Now I know that my mind creates a person. Do you notice what just happened there? I said, now I know. There we are again. I know that. And there's the mind kicking in right away. I know. I understand. I get. And so on and so forth. Little trick of the mind. Throwing in the person at the very last second. No matter how clever the model that the mind is going to come up with. And some people listening might be very attracted to a model that they've heard from perhaps a teaching or a book or a friend or whomever, and they might be very committed to that model. They might discard this, what's being said here, out of hand. They might say, no, I've got it on very good authority that there is a way to get enlightened, and they're in that sort of mind field, I might call it. So there might be a teaching, for example, that let's go with a very conventional teaching, a teaching that might say what there is a seeker who's got struggles in the world, who finds life difficult, and what they need to do is recognize that it's the ego, perhaps, that struggles. The ego doesn't like to lose, the ego's afraid of death, and so on. And the teaching might revolve in some ways around the ego, this thing called the ego, which needs to be looked at, addressed, gotten over, resolved. And there are still a lot of teachings out there who focus on the ego in terms of it's a barrier, it's a block. The ego will reject the truth. The ego doesn't want to hear this. All that sort of stuff. And that's a model of trying to understand something that is incomprehensible. But what if the model, just that conventional model, is believed in entirely? Then it's great in a way. It provides a structure for a pursuit or endeavour to take place in. It feels comfortable. There's something to do now as a seeker. I can now work on my ego. Now that I know what the problem is, I can set about dismantling it somehow. I will meditate on the problem. I'll become really nice, because then my ego will sort of be humble or something, or I'll work on my belief systems or something along that line of thinking, and so on. And then you can find yourself down a rabbit hole, so to speak, of that model, unable to turn around, unwilling to turn around, unwilling to hear perhaps that it's just a model, just another thought structure. And these thought structures, they're quite pernicious. They are the reality in many ways. You literally are in your thought. Literally, that's where you are. And so how can the you that you think you are turn around out of the thoughts? You exist in and as the thoughts themselves. So no matter how clever the model, how sophisticated, how pure, how devotional, how intelligent, etc. and so forth, the model is, it's a model, and it all appears, or it's all within the awakeness itself, the ever-present substrate of existence itself, the awakeness itself. Nothing impacts on the awakeness. No ego affects the awakeness. No ego will get awake. Nothing in the appearance causes anything in the appearance to happen. Nothing in the appearance causes the substrate of existence to exist. It just is. It just is, and that thought is so staggering that the mind almost becomes dizzy at trying to comprehend the infinite. The absolute foundational nature of this existence is infinite. The mind can't even go there. The poor mind. So the next best thing is to create a model for it somehow, a way of thinking about it, a cognitive structure, you could say, add a bit of a psych flavour, and just roll with that. And a lot of teachings around this issue seem to get muddied when the teacher or the teaching suggests endeavours and activities, or even what is discussed in a meeting perhaps where people are discussing this can muddy it, because whatever's discussed in the meeting seems to imply that that's somehow important to liberation, that this discussion is necessary in some way. And there are even beliefs around that, like because we're discussing it, it must need to be heard. By whom? By me. I need to discuss this. And the people listening to discussions might nod and go, yeah, I need to hear this. This will help. Help what? Help who? Help who get what? And those questions are intolerable. But they're not intolerable because they're unpleasant necessarily, even though they might be. They're intolerable because they're unthinkable. The answer's unthinkable, meaning not because it's awful, because it literally can't be thought about. Made up a new word there. Thinked about. I like that. So the poor old mind can only stick to what it can do. It can only think. That's all it can do. You know, it can only think and have beliefs and cognitions and images and fantasies and so on. That's all it knows how to do. So it does it. It goes ahead and does it. And the idea that these ideas and fantasies and structures, etc., are true is perhaps where it gets a bit tricky, I would suggest. That one thought is true, or truer, or more true than another. And when you lock onto that idea, you find yourself in another rabbit hole. That there's a truth, and you'll figure it out. And when you figure it out, there'll be a reward. Like Skinner's rats in the cage pressing the levers. When I press the lever, there'll be a reward. But that's how the mind operates. So no matter how pure, how spiritual, how humble, how peaceful, how serene, how beautiful the thinking, the teaching, the vibe in the room is, it doesn't impact on the very existence, the very awakeness itself. And you can verify that very quickly by asking yourself one simple question. Has there ever, or you could ask it the other way, could there ever be an experience of not existing? Could not existing ever happen and you know about it? Or the other way, as far as you know, have you ever not existed? Or as far as you know, have you always existed? And when you look at the very existence itself, it's obvious straight away that all I we could say, have ever done or being is that existence. It hasn't been interrupted. I've never had an experience of not existing. I could hear stories that I passed out at a party after drinking a lot of beer, but to hear that story, I have to exist. Funny, isn't it? So, I hope this very brief dialogue on this quite large topic was in some ways interesting and gave you some mind food to chew on. This has been X Winterview with another brief dialogue. Thanks for listening. Comments are welcome.